Hello and welcome to this fireside chat of the Center on Regulation and Markets at the Brookings Institution. My name is Sanjay Patnaik and I'm the director of the center. In our fireside chats, we explore important issues at the intersection of modern day markets and regulations in one-on-one conversations with business leaders, regulators, and academics. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Michael Allegretti, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of Rubicon Global. He leads the company's rapidly growing Rubicon Smart City business and oversees all public policy, corporate communications, marketing, and sustainability operations. Prior to joining Rubicon, Michael oversaw public policy at Uber Technologies in New York City, and he has also served as a senior advisor to the Climate Group, where he advised former Prime Minister Tony Blair, organized the historic C40 Large Cities Climate Summit, and led public policy for the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research. Prior to that, he was a political and public policy analyst for UBS. He has an undergraduate degree from Boston College, where he graduated with honors, and he has a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University, as well as a diploma from CS Po in Paris. He serves as an advisor to Citizen, which is a startup that alerts citizens in real time to crimes in their neighborhood, and he's also a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee to the Hudson River Park Trust. He recently served as US chair of the British American Project and was a board member of the New York State League of Conservation Voters. Michael, thank you so much for being here today and for doing this. Welcome.
Sanjay, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and congratulations on the birth of your child as well.
Thank you very much. So I thought maybe we can start off today by talking a little bit about your company. You can give us a bit of an overview. How has your company developed, especially from its beginnings as a small startup to a really highly successful industry player? And can you maybe briefly explain also your business model to our audience?
Absolutely. So Rubicon is a software company that provides smart waste and recycling solutions, and we provide those to businesses and to governments worldwide. And so different than a traditional waste management company, we don't own hard assets. We're a technology company. So no landfills, no recycling facilities, which are known as MRFs, no trucks or garbage men and women. Instead, we're a platform on which thousands of independent waste haulers, these are small mom and pop operations up to regional players, potentially with hundreds of trucks, service our customers. So we hold contracts with commercial customers. And these are many of the world's biggest companies, certainly retailers, grocery stores, restaurants, brands you know and love, big boxes, all the way down to small Main Street businesses. So we have a platform on which these haulers sit, technology and data platform, and they serve those customers picking up the stuff, right? The waste, the recycling, the organics, and we're collecting data about those waste streams to help inform our overall goal, which is to end waste. So we're working with our customers to try and reduce the amount of waste that they send to landfill every day. So our mission is to end waste, but to end it in all its forms. The other large part of our business, Sanjay, is our government business called Rubicon Smart City. In that business, we work directly with city governments. And so the governments in that case are the haulers of the waste, and our technology helps them not just deliver better customer service to the taxpayer, but to look at other aspects of waste. So we're trying to help those operations reduce waste flows to landfill, but we're also trying to help them reduce wasted time, wasted tax dollars, wasted public labor, energy, or manpower. So we look at waste holistically in that sense.
Well, that's very interesting. And that's actually a perfect segue to my next question. So here at the center, we think a lot about regulation and markets, right? And so I'm curious, in your industry, which is the waste industry, how is it regulated? And how important are interactions between companies and government representatives?
Oh, they're absolutely critical. So first, to answer the first part of your question, how is it regulated? It's regulated principally at the city, county, and to a lesser degree, the state level. Okay. Federal regulation is far less. You don't have kind of a national waste management regime. So at a minimum, you have 50 regimes. If you count the territories, you have 54. And then it's really at that city and county level. But the interaction between the private sector, right, companies, be it technology companies like ours or traditional landfill owning waste management companies, and government is mission critical. And it's mission critical for a number of reasons. So one reason is many businesses, particularly those that serve residential customers, apply to have franchises, exclusive rights to pick up and dispose of waste in a given area. Sometimes that's also for commercial waste, but generally it'll be for residential. So there's an interaction there between government and the company or companies that aspire to have that franchise. For our business, particularly our Rubicon Smart City business, we are selling technology directly to city government fleets. So there's a very strong interaction there, a commercial relationship, but also one of technology co-innovation. We're building the product through their eyes. So they're in many ways our city partners. We have over 55 of them now, are technology development partners as much as potential or current customers.
Oh, that's very interesting. And so how do you approach dealing with governments? Do you have like an own team that only focuses on that, or do you integrate it with your broader business strategy?
It's the right question. So I think it's all of the above, but yes, we do have a team. At Rubicon, we have a very small but nimble public policy operation that's monitoring laws and regulations as they come to the fore. We also have a product that we're rolling out called Rubicon RegWatch, which is a really cool product. It's, when I say rolling out, it's literally rolling out this week. And it's something right now for our current customers. Soon it'll be for a broader subset. But this product is a technology product that provides our customers, be them the biggest big box retailers down to a Main Street business, the ability to understand if they are in compliance with current laws in their physical jurisdiction.
Wow, that's amazing. So you looked at all the different local laws, and then I would imagine incorporate this into the software so that you can look for every location where those are. That's pretty cool.
That's exactly right. And then finally, our smart city team, the team that is building, selling, and serving our smart city product. All they do is interact with government. They interact with government to present the product, to gain feedback from the frontline worker all the way to the mayor's office on how the product works, how it could be enhanced, to understand not just the economic ROI of the product, but also the political ROI. And that's such a key thing when you're working with or selling to government. Does the product or service you have contribute to multiple wins? An economic win or a taxpayer win for sure. Yeah. But also, does it make sense in the broader political and policy context of that jurisdiction? If a city is, quote unquote, trying to go green or become sustainable, are you helping them along that way? Or are you only saving them tax dollars? And we think it's imperative to be able to walk and chew gum, to do multiple things to help our cities at once.
That's actually very interesting. That relates to my own work. So it's really an integration of market strategy and then what we call non-market strategy.
Exactly.
Great. The next topic is something that has been in the media quite a bit. And so I'm curious. So we have seen about 2 years ago, China stopped accepting recycling waste from the United States and from most other countries in the world. And so what we have seen since then is it seems that a lot of the recycling industry in the US has been overwhelmed. And there are reports that most plastic doesn't get recycled anymore. It ends up in the landfills. So I'm curious, have you seen these issues? And what do you think might be a potential solution from the government and the business side here in the United States to address this?
Well, I'm outspoken on this issue because when China instituted its national sword policy, which was a good marketing, right? It was when they said, we're no longer going to take your low-grade recyclable material and import it into our country. And then that's escalated over time to essentially saying, we're really not going to even take your high-grade stuff if we're being honest about it. We don't want your garbage anymore. Yeah. And, you know, whatever feelings I might personally have about US and China policy and how our two nations work or don't work well together, I can't blame the Chinese people for not wanting to import garbage. I certainly don't want to do that myself here in the United States. So the incumbent industry looked at that and they were flailing about. They said, what do we do now? And the reason they were flailing about was for years in this country, we have been addicted to, and we're still addicted to, landfilling. It is in the best interest of many of the main players in the waste management ecosystem of the United States to have us as consumers or homeowners bury our problems in landfill. And when we had that relief valve of being able to ship off recyclable materials overseas to China or elsewhere, it took away any imperative for us to figure out how to do it economically here at home.
That's
And
interesting.
so I look at the sword, and while it's been hard, I mean, the first few months, the first year of this were very hard for the markets to understand. This is a wake-up call to the United States that we need to build a 21st century recycling infrastructure. It exists in other countries, and they are figuring out how to break even, make marginal amounts of money, maybe during down markets, because it is a commodity, not lose their shirt. And we've got to get there. The time is now, for better or for worse.
And what do you think is the time frame until which the industry would have adapted here and that we would hit that capacity that you see in some other countries?
Well, I think, unfortunately, absent a policy like National Sword coming along, it probably wouldn't have happened. And, I don't know, in your life, you have a child now, you're going to have a lot of, single-use disposable material coming your way. But most people want to recycle. It's not a controversial issue to recycle. It's not even really a political issue, but we don't really know how. I'm in Pennsylvania right now. I believe you're in Washington. We have different laws, right? I said the laws, there's no national standard. So every state, every county, every city has their own way of sorting recyclable material, and they accept certain things in some places. They don't accept them in others. I'm not advocating that we need a sweeping national policy on this, nor that we have to somehow make it uniform, but at a minimum, we can make demonstrative progress by coming up with some universal type of labeling. So that you and I in different places, at least we're working from the same fact set.
That we would agree on what a standard is for recycling and kind of like common set of standards. That makes sense.
Exactly. And that would help to reduce the real Scrooge of the recycling economics, which is contamination. And you take your pizza box, if you eat pizza, the grease that's on that box, if too much of that gets into the cardboard, that cardboard can't be recycled anymore in most places. So things like that, or you take a yogurt container, right? Everyone's eating Greek yogurt these days. If you don't wash that out, that really can't be recycled. So if you mix single sheet paper in with bottles and cans, you might muck up the entire load of recycling. So helping to educate people with common labeling would actually go a very long way, because once you have a greater volume of recyclable material that is clean and ready to be recycled, you could start to command at least break even or profit on the recycling market.
That makes sense. And one aspect of your business, as I understand it, is really to look for efficiencies. And so I'm curious, what are some of the most common inefficiencies that you see among haulers and municipalities when they look at waste management?
Routing.
Interesting. That's would not have been my first thought.
It wasn't mine either. I don't mean to give a commercial here, but it's illustrative. City of Atlanta was the first city with whom we worked on Rubicon Smart City. We've since worked with dozens over them. That city alone, we were able to produce over $750,000 of year-over-year savings by optimizing the way the fleet runs, by actually increasing, this was counterintuitive, increasing the number of delivery days from pickup days from 4 days to 5 days, but reducing the length of each route. So even it's science. And so the goal is to have each of the trucks go for the shortest amount of time possible and pick up the most stuff, right? And there's software to do that. There's a touch of human analysis that's required. Any tech company that says it could be fully automated is not being genuine, in my opinion. A combination of great technology, data analytics, and a touch of human common sense, where you can optimize the way fleets run. And that has cascading effects. So suddenly, are you bringing down overtime? Yes, right? That's real savings for a city. Suddenly, are you, so you're reducing the vehicles on the road, you're bringing down overtime, you're reducing the carbon emissions, right? That's another issue. Every city wants to, and this again isn't political, whether you're talking about carbon emissions or you're talking about the fact that no one wants a garbage truck on their street more than it should be. Ultimately, it's a quality of life thing. So you're able to get gains there as well.
And how do you go about like trying to shorten the routes and trying to make it more efficient? Is it all an algorithm? Do you guys have a team that looks at it also manually, or is it really all done by technology?
It is principally done by technology, but that's where I say with a touch of common sense. I mean, roads change, traffic patterns change. We have technology that feeds in historical data about things like that. But you also need people, and you asked earlier about government and business, what's that interaction like? We actually take the feedback of the men and women who have worked in a city for 10, 20, 30 years, help us understand what is the data maybe not telling us that intuitively can't be picked up by data.
And that's interesting.
When you combine that, that's when you get real wins.
Okay. And so you alluded a little bit at it already before, which is the importance of consumer behavior in your industry, right? It's really a critical factor in managing waste and trying to reduce waste even by generating it. And so what are some of the incentives that you think work best in really influencing customers and consumers? And specifically, what do you think can governments do to motivate businesses and industries to manage waste in a bit more an efficient manner?
Well, Sanjay, I think that the role of government, and this is not my editorial, but I believe that a very important role of government, particularly as it pertains to waste management, is actually now to let the consumer sentiment drive the businesses. Our biggest businesses, and we're talking, major big box retailers with tens of thousands of stores, dollar stores, all the way up the value chain to more luxury brands, you're suddenly seeing that consumer sentiment is saying, we expect that the places from where we buy things are sourcing materials responsibly and doing their part, certainly not to pollute at a bare minimum, and ideally to at least contribute something positively to the environment in which they function. Larry Fink, I think, was really put a mark in the ground and said, sustainability is no longer a nice to have. It's now the way we're going to start evaluating companies. A role for government, I think, government-run pension funds, to their credit, have played a really big role in helping to bring Wall Street along and helping to move businesses in this direction at the onset. But now the consumers are actually pushing the businesses. And they're pushing the governments to say, no, we expect this. Every city that, even in this budget time, might have to claw back curbside recycling, they're seeing pushback now from their citizens that say, we've been recycling for 10 years. We're not going to suddenly start throwing plastic yogurt cans in the garbage. You have to find the money and the resources. Think more creatively.
That's actually very interesting. So it's really market driven.
I believe so, yes. At this stage, that's what's now happened. And it wasn't always like that. Let's be clear about that. It was the purview of environmental organizations and nonprofits that were clamoring for this sort of action, often on deaf ears in corporate America. And that has now changed.
And I think that's probably also generational change, because we see a lot of young people that really care about that and that push quite vocally for that, right? In their purchasing behavior. Absolutely.
And, I just did a podcast about a week and a half ago for something called the American Conservation Coalition. Fascinating organization. This is, it was founded by a group of free market, a group. It was a young man with a free market orientation who has since built out a network to over 300 universities and schools across the United States.
Oh, wow. And
the whole goal of this organization is to take the politics out of these issues and say, whether you're 17 years old or 75 years old, a staunch conservative or a proud progressive, we can agree on certain things. There's a role for the market and there's a role for government, and either one is exclusively in control, you're never going to get there. So you actually need both.
You need the combination. That's interesting. That's also what a lot of our work here at the center actually focuses on. And so you had mentioned earlier that there are some countries that have done a much better job in actually building that recycling capacity. And so I think Europe, for instance, has been quite pioneering in that area. So what kind of models, either internationally or even nationally, have worked so far in this regard, do you think? And what lessons can be learned from some of those examples?
Sure. So I think starting maybe at a high level, what is good public policy that I would argue does not overreach. Right now in the United States, the policy winds are at Rubicon's back, and they're at the back of companies like ours in waste management or other sectors that are striving to reduce materials going to landfill. What do I mean by that? Every single day or every single week, a new bill or law is promulgated that bans a certain material from being allowed to be buried in the ground. So I do think that's a constructive role for government. You can no longer take, styrofoam is increasingly out of favor. You can't continue to produce these materials that never biodegrade, right? So more and more you're seeing places say, no, you have to do better as the private sector in terms of developing packaging that does not harm the environment. And so that's been very helpful. I think back to Europe and kind of what countries, I don't necessarily have the specific countries off the top of my head, but what I will say is, particularly in Europe and in some parts of the United States, the key is segmentation. That's segmentation and contamination. These two things go together in waste management. The more you can segment your waste and keep the streams separated, the better chance we have as an industry and as a country to not just break even, but ultimately start to get back to making profit off of the waste streams. At Rubicon, we see waste as an asset. We truly do. We see opportunities to make money. One of our largest customers, a dollar store, had thousands and thousands of tons of cardboard, and call it OCC in the industry. And what was essentially happening was trucks were going out to their stores, depositing goods and to be sold. And then the truck was going back to the distribution center empty. We looked at their waste stream and we said, well, wait a minute. When that truck leaves, what could it leave with? It could leave with all the packaging that it dropped off the day before. And instead of taking it to a landfill, there's enough valuable packaging in there, particularly cardboard, that we could get it into a recycling stream. This dollar store didn't make $5 billion off of this. They made something off of it, and they did well by the environment. These are the small wins that together actually create impact.
So that seems to emphasize really the key point or the key bottleneck is at the customer or at the organization or the person where the waste gets picked up, right? You talked about segmentation. That means it would be more beneficial, for instance, if we had like one stream for glass, one stream for plastic, one stream for paper. So is that correct, that assessment?
It is generally correct. I mean, what happens is the more recyclable stuff you put into one bin, the greater the chance that you put the wrong thing in there and muck up the entire load. So at a high level, you're right. The only way that wouldn't be the case is if you had these perfectly knowledgeable recyclers across the country who always put the right things in. But you have to look a level deeper. Why does our country have such a reliance on single stream recycling? Why do we just put everything in one bin? Well, I would argue that the landfill industry over decades had an incentive to do that, because the more that recycling gets contaminated, where does it have to go if it's contaminated? Back to
that's interesting. It would go in the landfill.
It met the kind of American desire for keep it simple. I'll do this if it's not too hard. I'm not a European. I'm not going to have 10 garbage pails. But the problem is it ends up back in a landfill. So it's a trade-off between clean air and clean water, and maybe doing a little more at the consumer level.
At the consumer side. Well, that's interesting. And so I think there's a concept that your company brought up in May in your ESG report, right? So you talked about how waste is very a big danger to the environment, to the economy, to our security and health. and that the approach that you center on is really the circular economy. And so the circular economy has been a buzzword that has been out there in the media quite a lot. And so can you talk a little bit about in more depth what it actually means? What is the circular economy and how does Rubicon see it? And what are kind of some practical steps to actually get there?
It's a really good question, Sanjay. And if
a bit complex, probably. So
no, it is, because I struggle with it. I struggle with, where is the line between something being circular and recyclable? And we were having a conversation recently, a strategy conversation about what does the world's first circular car look like? How could one create automobiles that are fully circular? So I think at the highest level, the idea is that a material never goes to a landfill. It ultimately continues to be used in some way. And we do actually have a kind of age-old template here in the aluminum industry. I think upwards of 75–80% of the aluminum we use today is the same aluminum we were using 10 or 20 years ago. So that material is remarkable at continuing to regenerate itself. Yeah. And if you go and buy a beer or a soda, try to buy a can versus a bottle. I'll just say that because you're doing better by the environment in that sense. But we have to look at all packaging. Packaging is really a main ripe area where we can start to get this right. How do we create circular packaging? And some of it is not all that revolutionary. We had, back in the day, the milkman. I wasn't alive, but apparently there was a milkman, or maybe a milkwoman, who came.
Our grandmother's generation, right?
Our grandmother's generation. That was actually a circular solution. Yeah. Do we need to, every time we buy milk, have a new carton that, maybe sometimes it's recycled, maybe sometimes it's not? Well, the times it's not, that's not a circular solution. You had a milk bottle that was continually being filled, right, and brought back to you. You certainly had jobs that were created, but you also weren't creating any waste. Yeah. Now, I know this is a silly example, but it's illustrative of how do we do things like that on a bigger scale? What will batteries look like, right? Back to the car example. How do you have truly circular life for batteries, automobile parts, things like that? And I think once you get into those higher value items versus, say, the milk bottle, then you'll be driving real impact.
It's probably going to be taking a lot of effort among manufacturers and industry and consumers to really make that shift, right?
It will. It does and it will. But back to the public policy question, I think as more and more countries and even some kind of enterprising states start to implement consumer or end-of-life mandates for materials, the incentive, it goes from an incentive to a bit of a carrot and a stick, right? So suddenly the company's going to have to figure this out, because the alternative is going to be you have to pay some sort of fee or penalty for materials not being circular. But we still think there's a lot of opportunity just based on consumer sentiment for businesses to want to get in that direction.
That's interesting. That seems to be an area that is really ripe for kind of like both the interplay of government incentives and regulation and then market dynamics, right? And consumer pushes. Interesting. I want to move away a little bit from the circular economy question and talk about data privacy, which is so your company is really centered around data and technology. And interestingly, you have begun to implement camera-based technologies where you collect visual data points as your trucks drive along their routes, which is quite interesting. And I would imagine probably generates quite a lot of data. And so I'm curious, how do you go about tackling privacy concerns with these data? And do you face any laws and regulations that would govern your decisions in that regard?
Well, I really appreciate this question. And one of our city partners and the city of Toronto has been an innovation partner with us on aspects of this technology from a very, very early time. And I mentioned Toronto because they have some of the strictest data privacy laws in the world. And that's the government in particular, are just incredible stewards of the taxpayer privacy and ensuring that things are done properly. So they have pushed us as a company. They've made us a better company. They've kept that issue for us as a tech company front and center throughout the development of our tech. And I just want to say I'm very appreciative of that. So for us, it's actually not that complicated. So waste itself, when you put waste on the curb, the expectation of personal privacy is gone. It's now, that's something I didn't know until I got into this industry. But once you take your trash out, your expectation of privacy is gone. We don't think that's good enough. So we're looking always at things like personal identifiable information. We keep that completely segregated. We don't hold on to that. We don't have any ability to kind of track a load of garbage back to a man or woman's name. That's very important. But to your question about, a truck rolling down with a camera taking pictures. Well, our cameras are trained to only look for certain things. Things like contamination in a recycling bin, things like a pothole, things like a garbage lid that's overflowing, so it's open like this. So a camera frame identifies the thing it's looking for and only then takes a picture. That's very different than, say, a video camera that's just rolling as a street goes or a truck goes down a street.
So it's more targeted. It's not kind of like Google Maps that like takes a view of the entire street.
It's completely different. Exactly. It's photos that are only taken when our algorithm sees the thing it's looking for. And then to be extra cautious and to help alleviate concerns, we blur out anything outside of the box of what we're taking, right? Because the camera lens might be wider than the box. The rest is blurred out.
So what would you mentioned that example, right? That it takes a photo, for instance, if the garbage can is overflowing. So what would that information help you do? But does that mean that, oh, actually the truck has to come by more often because there's more waste that is being picked up? I'm curious.
I'm laughing because I realize I've worked at Rubicon 4 years, and when I came from Uber, if someone said we're looking for overflowing garbage pails, I'd be scratching my head. Why are you looking for these things? So in this city, for instance, a city that and this goes back to public policy. If a city has what's called pay as you throw as a regiment, that means you pay for what you dispose of. So let's say every time the garbage pail is overflowed, this triangle is lost revenue for a city, right? Because the person only paid for this much and they stuffed all this extra stuff in. So if the city can identify where, well, first of all, what are the reasons it's overflowing? And how often is it overflowing? Where is that happening? They could first try to educate that homeowner or business, and then ultimately they can do one of two things. They could potentially levy some sort of fine, or they could basically say, listen, you have the wrong size garbage pail, or you don't have the right size recycling box. Here's a one that fits your needs.
Interesting. Okay, so it can be customizing maybe some of the solutions more to different customers.
That's right.
Great. So I'd like to talk about a few more other things. So if you have time. So one is in the report that I mentioned earlier, the ESG report, you recommend what you call sustainable reporting. Can you explain a little bit to your audience what is this, how it works, and to what extent regulators, investors, and consumers reward sustainable reporting, especially in the context of waste?
Sure. So, waste has been, in my opinion, kind of the forgotten element of the broader sustainability movement for quite some time. So there's a decent track record of companies reporting on, say, carbon emissions, right? That's through the Carbon Disclosure Project. They're reporting out energy use, and ideally every company wants to show a reduction in energy use, but not too much, because then it seems that their business isn't going well. So they have to show that maybe they're replacing it with renewable sources. So the way that they're reporting out on these things matters too, because if, let's say, you're an investor and you just see a steady reduction in energy use, you might assume that that business is, say it's a manufacturer, is suddenly it's contracting, or you might deduce it's getting more efficient, right? Which would be the other. So there's lots of examples in energy, water use, even in the built environment. Companies and governments often report on improved sustainable standards for buildings as well. But waste largely has been absent from those reports. either voluntary CSR, corporate social responsibility reports, ESG reports, or these third-party disclosures. I think in the last 2 to 3 years, you've seen a fundamental change in that. And
Okay.
have said, oh my gosh, and by folks, I mean people on Wall Street have said, we're missing a huge piece of the picture when we don't look at waste management with that same level of scrutiny. So what are some of the metrics that, Wall Street, investors, I would argue consumers as well, are looking at? They're looking at landfill diversion numbers, companies sending fewer materials to a landfill, both from their daily sales and marketing activities, but also from their supply chain. I think secondly, they're looking at packaging, right? They're reporting out on packaging. Are they able to ship the same materials to and from places safely and securely, but with less packaging? And if not less packaging, then surely packaging that does not harm the environment. Those are two areas that I think increasingly are a big part of reporting. And the market rewards companies that are proactively tackling those things.
And do you think there might be a role for regulators to actually set standards for this kind of like sustainable reporting instead of having investors or industry standards driving this?
So far, what I'm seeing is that these organizations like Carbon Disclosure Project, the Sustainable Development Goals, which aren't really a reporting mechanism, but instead these aspirational goals to which we go. Our customer base, and we have a very diverse customer base. I want to be clear about that. We're not simply working with kind of the urban, progressive companies, whatever that means. We're working across the country in rural America as much as on the coasts. They are making the decision to self-report because it is good business.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, until I see that change, I would say, let's not rock the boat on this. The change is actually happening. And I think there's, if anything, corporate America would fear any sort of government interaction that might pull that back, because these are big investments. These are long-term investments. If you rebuild the fundamentals of, say, a coffee cup or the way a child's toy is shipped, that has reverberations through a supply chain that hit, potentially hundreds of or dozens of countries, and it could be a 5-year process. So they've started already, and they just want to make sure things stay as they are so that they continue to make those gains.
Okay, interesting. Another question relates a bit kind of like to inequality, right? So if we look historically, a lot of marginalized communities are disproportionately exposed to waste-related activities. Many of them are located close to landfills or hazardous waste sites. And so, and these obviously have very severe health implications, right, for those low-income communities. So what do you think ways are that governments and companies can tackle this? And do you think maybe that artificial intelligence systems that might be deployed in that regard could either worsen some of those inequalities or maybe help address them?
It's a very thoughtful question. So you are spot on that there is an environmental justice issue at the heart of America and really the world's waste management regime. There are no landfills sitting in Midtown Manhattan or, Northwest Washington, D.C. Let's be clear about that. And the populations who live near these things are the folks with the quietest voices, the least amount of ability to enact change against them. It's not rocket science what we need to do. We have to stop building and expanding landfills. I mean, ultimately, that is how we start to turn the corner on this issue at the highest level. Now, there are many marginal things we could do to lessen the impact while we're saddled with these landfills. And it goes back to that earlier point about fleet route optimization. If I can have, instead of having 3 trucks going to a landfill a day, if I can reduce that 33% have 2 trucks go, or even just 1 truck go, it might not seem like a big deal, but play that out over 100 trucks in a fleet and 365 days a year, and think about asthma rates and think about carbon emissions, and suddenly you've had a real impact on that community. Now, the gold standard is we don't want any trucks going to the landfill because ultimately we don't want there to be landfills. But we have to get there. And the first way we can get there is through better routing and the optimization of the way these vehicles move.
Interesting. So really kind of like reduce the exposure. Okay.
But there is a hidden story to it, Sanjay. I mean, the companies that own landfills, and this isn't bad, it's just economics. They have an incentive for trucks to go to their disposal facility as frequently as possible.
Because they get paid for it, right? So it's kind of
exactly.
Okay.
So
the wrong incentive.
You know, you asked about artificial intelligence, and I would just say it's intelligence at the most base level. I'd rather a full garbage truck go to a landfill once than have 3 garbage trucks that are a third of the way full go there 3 times.
Yeah.
Right? That's better for the environment, and it just makes common sense. But if you own a landfill, you'd rather the 3 trucks go there only partially full. And at Rubicon, part of what our technology platform, I mean, a core element of our technology platform, frankly, is looking at that exact thing, helping our customers right-size their service. We don't want them to overpay and be serviced more than they need to because of cascading environmental impact.
That makes sense. As you know, and that relates to inequality, obviously, a little bit. We are currently in a pandemic, so the coronavirus crisis is not going away, as it seems. And so how has the pandemic really affected waste generation and management? I'm curious about this because I would imagine probably that waste might have increased, right? Like with single-use items, with like masks, with like gloves, things like that. So I'm curious what you have seen on the ground, and how have cities and municipalities coped with reduced city budgets, workforce concerns in the wake of the crisis?
I mean, this is a major story. I mean, in the face of hundreds of thousands of people dying, it's obviously a subordinate story, but it's a very important one. So waste has gone through the roof at the household level, right? That's good. Are you working from home? I don't know.
Yes, I am. Like,
lovely background. We know that waste in our home is going through the roof. Commercial waste went down initially. Obviously, businesses were closed. It's coming back, but residential waste is still staying up where it is. These are historic levels. Most of the residential waste in the U.S., or at least upwards of 50%, is picked up by governments. So they are the truck that picks up your garbage in most American cities is a government-owned truck. So to your question about budgets, right? Not only is there more waste at the household level, but the folks who really have the least means right now to do it, these city governments, are being stuck, with even more work to do. Take on top of that a dwindling workforce because of COVID, right? One infection, suddenly, 70, 75 people are out of work for 2 weeks or more. So that's what's happened in terms of the amount of waste. In terms of the type of waste, you're right about this. We were seeing a movement away. It was a nascent movement from single-use materials, right? We were starting to, you saw the hotel chains, most notably, we're going to move away from the little shampoo bottles. Suddenly that's off the table, at least temporarily. So
of course, public health clashes with the waste management here, I guess, right?
and so it is about trade-offs. I mean, there's a pullback and a bit of a lean into single-use materials for the sake of public health right now. And that's okay. It's a temporary thing. But the PPE problem, the numbers of masks and gloves, the littering our parks and places like that, is a major issue. And we need to, as an industry, and Rubicon has to be a part of it, think about creative ways to sanitize that and at least try to get it recycled or disposed of in a way that ensures that public health is maintained. But cities, Sanjay, I'll just close on this. You asked, how are they doing given the budget constraints they're under?
Right.
And it's a remarkable story for our business in particular. The number of partnerships that we have signed during the course of the pandemic has gone through the roof.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Counterintuitive to us.
Yeah.
Our technology, the smart city technology, it does a lot of things, but at the highest level, it actually enables remote work.
How so? Can you explain a little bit what the smart city concept is and how it enables remote work?
So it's a technology suite, a software suite. So we have tech that goes in the trucks. So the city of Washington, D.C. Is a pilot member of our ecosystem.
Yeah.
A bit of inside information for you.
That will be shared widely.
Which will be shared widely. That's all right. They're testing out our technology right now. So
okay.
they will have a GPS, a telematics device that's going to be inserted into their truck, as well as what we call an in-cab interface, which is basically our app on an iPhone sitting on the dashboard.
Okay.
And those two components together are collecting lots of data about the behavior of the truck, about the when and where the garbage was picked up or not picked up, what's in the waste stream, things of that sort. And that's feeding that material back to a portal, which is a fancy way of saying a website that someone can kind of command center, where the head of a fleet can see where the vehicles are, how they're progressing, if they need help, is there a better way to route the truck? And so when you take a step back, you say, okay, if a city has to suddenly migrate to a remote work environment, managers are at home. Well, now they have a command center to run their whole operation from. So we've had city after city saying, could we please either sign on with you guys as a customer or test drive you for a few weeks so that we could ideally, procure you down the line rather quickly, because the garbage is increasing, as I told you.
Yeah.
Workforce is decreasing, unfortunately, at least temporarily.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of money right now, so we need savings wherever we can get them. So if you can sell me something for, say, $50 and you could save me 75, I will take that every day. That's what
they can really log in from anywhere and like monitor the fleet operations.
Exactly. And they can make changes in real time. So if let's say a truck breaks down in, I don't know, Northwest DC, and an available truck over in Southwest that's completing its route and it has some excess capacity in it, they can message that truck and get it over to help the truck that just went down. Why does that matter? Because if you have to send a new truck out, you've got a whole new day's worth of work. You have a whole new truck you've put on the road. That might cost the city, I'm using theoretical numbers, let's say $100.
Yeah.
And bringing the truck from somewhere else might only cost it $10.
Yeah.
All that incremental savings matters, especially in a time like this.
And how does it work with the driver? So you mentioned, for instance, you have the phone on the dashboard, right? Does the driver have to manually input information, or does everything get collected automatically at the truck level?
So using rough numbers, 95%, 99% of the information is gathered automatically. What's not gathered automatically are exceptions or observations that the driver wants to note. So, and this is where the product is really evolving. It's not just a telematics or fleet technology. It's a smart city technology. The driver can be driving down the road, and let's say the head of the department says, all right, guys, this week we're going to look for abandoned homes in the community, or we're going to look for graffiti in the community. If you're out along your route picking up the garbage, if you see graffiti, make a note of it. One touch on the phone, just make it, drop a pin, so to speak, where you see it. Well, what a cool idea, because now instead of a city sending out, feet on the street to go audit a neighborhood to look for graffiti, write it down, or maybe put it on a laptop, bring it over somewhere, have another team go out. As the truck's going about picking up the trash, it's doing an index of these community conditions.
And they go everywhere anyway, so that's interesting. So you save a lot of money and additional manpower, right?
And they don't discriminate by zip code. Garbage truck goes everywhere. So the poorest neighborhood and the richest neighborhood are both getting that, I would argue, very high touch service. Proactive government, looking for problems in the community before they become crises, before the citizen calls in and complains.
Interesting. So I have one more last question, which is kind of like a little bit related to your own personal experience, right? So you oversaw public policy for Uber in New York, which is a very interesting and also challenging market in some regards. How has your experience at Uber informed your work at Rubicon? And what do you see as some critical challenges facing urban areas like New York City in the future?
It's a big question to end on, Sanjay.
Something light to digest, right?
when I was at Uber, Uber was a fundamentally different company than it is today. You know, it was fighting many regulatory battles, and perhaps the highest profile one, certainly in the company's life cycle until that point, was in New York, where I was. And it was a battle between a better way of doing things, a way that customers wanted, right? The ability to push a button and get a ride, and an entrenched interest. And it wasn't a bad entrenched interest. You had taxi drivers, medallion owners who owned this asset that was suddenly under attack. But what we can't lose sight of is it was under attack because of the market. And ultimately, you know, what my time at Uber taught me, or really reinforced to me, is what I believe in my core, which is ultimately, with technology innovation or innovation in general, the market is the main driver that brings about the change. And then the role of government is to help ensure that the transition, which inevitably takes place, is a smooth and fair one for the folks who are perhaps on the other end of that equation.
Right.
But you know, to land the plane here, I will say also that, you know, you asked about government and business working together, and I feel with every fiber of my being that the people in government are good people, and that when they're pushing back through a regulatory process or a public policy process, perhaps against a company or against an idea, it's not necessarily in any sort of nefarious way. It's not intended to cause pain. It's intended to create fairness. So for us on the private sector side, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the bureaucrat and the lawmaker, and we have to understand their position, especially if we expect them to understand and respect ours. And too often in tech, particularly big tech, there's an inability or an unwillingness to do that, because we know, or we believe, our ideas are better, they're fresher, they're faster, and we need the industry to, the government, simply bend to our concept of what's good. And the reality is government isn't going anywhere. Government has a public trust, and we have to meet them in the middle to ultimately make progress. That's actually a really interesting point, especially to hear from a business side, because as you say, I think a lot of businesses have that immediate reaction, oh, regulation is always bad, but there's an underlying rationale for it, right? Like, as you say, in the public interest to correct some kind of market failure, for instance. Absolutely. So that's interesting to hear. Well, this has been very interesting for me. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're really busy, and I hope you and your family stay safe throughout this crisis, and all the best. Likewise, Sanjay. It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Take care. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.